Unforeseen car expenses. When I was 23, I bought a car and it seemed like it would change my life. More freedom, more mobility. But I completely failed to take into account that a car needs not only gas, but also maintenance, insurance, and regular repairs. It seems that it cost me more than the car itself. When I had to change the tires, I was shocked by the prices. Now I understand that buying a car was more of an expense than I could afford at that time. Renting an expensive apartment instead of a modest one. After college, I decided to rent an apartment in a nice area. I thought I could afford it with a good job. I liked the feeling of independence, of not having roommates. But rent was eating up most of my salary, and I had hardly saved any money. When the landlord raised the price, I realized I just couldn't afford it. Now I regret not choosing a more budget-friendly option from the beginning. Ignoring insurance. When I was 24, I thought insurance was for weaklings. I was healthy, young, nothing would happen to me. But one winter I broke my leg and all my savings went to medical expenses and rehabilitation. Then I realized that insurance is protection, not a waste of money. If I had insurance, I wouldn't have to survive on loans. Spending money on status things, I thought that a $500 watch and an expensive smartphone would help create the impression of a successful person. I thought that this was an investment in my reputation. But in fact, these things just gathered dust, and when I urgently needed money, their value dropped several times. Now I understand that such purchases do not make me successful. They are simply expenses that I cannot afford, not assessing the real value of a pet. When I was 22, I got a puppy without thinking about the expense of a lifetime. Food, vet visits, toys, and care cost me much more than I expected. I loved my dog, but I soon realized that I was not ready for such an expense. Luckily, I had friends who helped, but now I understand that you should only get a pet if you are financially prepared. Don't save for retirement from your first paycheck. I always thought that saving for retirement was for people over 40. But when I turned 28, I saw that some of my colleagues had started saving earlier, and they already had decent savings. I didn't save at all. If I had known how profitable it was to start early, I would have put aside at least a small amount. Now I am saving for retirement, but I understand that I have wasted precious years trying to start a business without a plan. When I was 25, I decided to open my own cafe. I always dreamed about it. I had savings, but no business plan and no knowledge of how everything works. I spent a lot of money on rent and equipment, but the cafe never took off. I was forced to close, losing all my investments. Today, I understand that business is not only dreams, but also preparation, planning, and experience. Take out new loans to pay off old debts. At some point, I realized that my credit card debts had become too big, and I decided to take out another loan to pay off the old debt. It seemed that this would solve the problem, but, in fact, I just drowned in even more debt. The loans grew like a snowball, and it was very difficult to get out of it. Now I know that loans should only be taken out as a last resort, and definitely not to pay off old debts. Ignoring discounts and sales. In my 20s, I thought taking advantage of discounts was a sign of poverty. I bought things at full price and thought that was the way to go. Now I realize how much money I lost because of that. Today, I check sales and loyalty programs, and it doesn't mean I'm saving on myself. On the contrary, I have enough money for more because I learned to buy profitably. Taking on expensive student loans. Without planning, I took out a student loan because it seemed like the right thing to do. But I didn't even think about whether I would be able to pay it off when I graduated. After graduation, I had to take any job I could to pay off the debt. And it was mentally and physically exhausting. Today, I would approach the issue differently and choose a more affordable education or think through a payment plan in advance. Financial mistakes people make in their 20s. 1. Don't save money at all. When I was 22, I had just gotten my first decent job out of college. Honestly, I was on cloud nine and thought everything was going to be great now. I spent all my money on restaurants, expensive brands, and trips. Every time I got a paycheck, I thought, why should I save? Life has just begun. I'll have time to save later. I'm 29 now, and I can't even imagine where all that money went. No savings, no financial cushion, nothing. If someone had told me back then to save at least 10% of my salary, I would have laughed. But now, with debt and mounting expenses, I understand how difficult it is to start from scratch as an adult. 2. Living paycheck to paycheck with no thought for the future. When I got my first job, I felt pretty independent and financially free, although the salary wasn't that high. I rented an apartment, took a taxi, and, of course, spent a lot of money on parties every weekend. As a result, I didn't have a single penny until the next paycheck. I always waited for it, like salvation. Then it seemed normal to me because I was young and earning money. After a couple of years, this habit became so ingrained that I couldn't save any money, even when I got a promotion. My salary went up, but so did my expenses. My savings were zero. And then I got laid off, and I was literally living on credit, eating up my credit card. Now I have to learn from my experience and cut back on my expenses. I wish I had known about this earlier and saved at least a little bit. 3. Misuse of credit cards. I got my first credit card at 21 and immediately decided that it was a way to live life to the fullest. On weekends, I would order the most expensive food, buy clothes, take taxis. I knew I had a limit, but I didn't really understand that it was a debt that would have to be repaid. I just paid the minimum and spent more. A year later, I realized that my credit card debt had grown to $3,000, and I have no idea what I spent all that money on. I had to take on an extra job to pay off that credit card. Now, I try to use my credit card only for emergencies, and I pay for every purchase right away. If I had known how bad a habit it was, I would never have taken that card without thinking. 4. Not understanding how taxes and mandatory payments work. When I got my first job, no one explained to me that salary before taxes and after taxes are two very different things. The contract stated an amount that looked impressive, and I naively thought that I would receive this money in full. After my first paycheck, I realized that I was getting much less than I expected. I was unpleasantly surprised, but I thought it was a one-time thing. As a result, I didn't take taxes into account and started spending more than I could afford, without putting money aside for mandatory expenses and taxes. 6 months later, a tax bill arrived, and I had to borrow money from my parents to pay it. If I had realized this earlier, I would have immediately included such mandatory expenses in the budget. 5. Putting all your money into risky investments. At 25, I started getting interested in investing because everyone was talking about cryptocurrency and the stock market. A friend talked me into investing some money in some hot stocks and crypto. I literally took everything I had and threw it into these assets, expecting big returns. After all, everyone was saying it was a fast-growing market. But when the market started to fall, I realized that I had neither the experience nor the knowledge to manage these investments. Psychologically, I was not ready for such a risk. First, I lost half of my money, and then, in a panic, I sold everything to save at least something. Today, I adhere to more conservative strategies and invest only the amount that I can afford to lose. Ignoring financial education. All my youth, I thought that I would figure out money as I went along, that no special education was needed to manage personal finances. I received money, I spent money, and it seemed that everyone did it. But after a few years, I discovered that I didn't understand anything about financial management. I didn't know how to budget properly, how to plan for the future, or how much to save. As a result, I was in debt. constantly living paycheck to paycheck, and didn't understand how to get out of this vicious circle. Only when I started studying financial literacy did I realize how many mistakes I could have avoided. If I had this knowledge earlier, I would have lived completely differently.